At just 13, Oya met Kenneth, a 20-year-old student from the neighboring village. He was everything her young heart had not known it longed for. Tall, charming, with a voice that wrapped around her like a warm breeze. Whenever they met in secret, against the backdrop of the golden sunsets and the whispering wind, it felt like they were the only two people in the world. What she did not know, however, was that the price of this first love would be more than she could ever imagine. Oya's mother, Ngozi, saw the danger long before it arrived. "My daughter, listen to me. Stay away from Kenneth," she would beg, her voice heavy with the kind of worry only a mother knows. "That boy is no good for you. He will bring nothing but trouble." But Oya, blinded by the light of young love, had waved her off. She could not see past Kenneth's promises of a life far from the confines of their simple village. How could she, when her heart fluttered every time he looked at her, as if the whole world had melted away? Her father, Chief Obiora, was not a man to be crossed. His gaze alone could make the bravest man shrink. When he found out about Oya's secret meetings with Kenneth, his anger came like a storm, fierce and unrelenting. "You will not dishonor this family," he thundered. He pulled her out of school and locked her away, thinking that would end it. But love, when young and rebellious, doesn't obey rules or locked doors. Late at night, with the stars as her witnesses, Oya would sneak out to meet Kenneth at his uncle's house. Her heart would pound, torn between the thrill of the forbidden and the fear of being caught. And then, one night, it happened. Her father, along with her brothers and the local police, stormed the house. Kenneth was dragged away in chains, while Oya's desperate cries were lost beneath the fury of her father's voice. "You've corrupted my daughter," Chief Obiora bellowed as Kenneth was taken away to face charges that had nothing to do with the law and everything to do with a broken heart. Kenneth was released after a week, but by then his life had unraveled. His uncle, shamed by the scandal, kicked him out, and Kenneth was forced to leave, disappearing into another state. For Oya, the pain of his absence was unbearable, but the real nightmare had only just begun. As the months passed, Oya noticed the changes in her body, the sickness in the mornings, the swelling of her belly, an undeniable truth growing inside her. She was pregnant. When her father found out, his rage returned with a vengeance. "How could you bring this shame upon us?" he roared. With no room for pity, Chief Obiora cast her out, shutting the door on his only daughter. Her mother, Ngozi, could do nothing but weep silently, powerless against the force of her husband's wrath. Through the kitchen window, her mother passed her a small bundle of clothes, her eyes filled with regret and sorrow. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words laced with tears. Oya's pleas to stay were met with nothing but silence as the door closed with a heavy, final thud. With nowhere to go, Oya wandered through the village streets, clutching her belongings in an old scarf. The night sky felt oppressive, as if it too weighed on her, its vastness reflecting the uncertainty of her future. She walked aimlessly until a voice cut through the quiet. "Oya! Oya!" It was Auntie Chidinma, her old neighbor. There was no warmth in her eyes, only a slight flicker of pity. She didn't say much, just pressed some money into Oya's hand and walked away. The gesture was small, but in that moment, it felt like a lifeline. Even so, Oya stood there alone, her heart heavy with sorrow and fear of what lay ahead. By the time she reached Kenneth's uncle's doorstep, she was shaking. Whether from the cold or from the fear, she couldn't tell. Her knock was faint, hesitant. When the door finally creaked open, Kenneth's uncle stood there, his eyes widening as he took in her disheveled appearance. "Oya, what on earth happened to you?" I'm pregnant," Oya stuttered, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt foreign in her mouth, like they didn't belong to her. The old man sighed deeply, shaking his head. "These children of nowadays, eh?" he muttered. Come inside before the neighbors start asking questions. The warmth of the house was a sharp contrast to the cold outside, but Oya didn't feel it. She stood, trembling in the middle of the room, trying to find the right words. Please, she started. Do you know where Kenneth is? She asked, her voice shaking as much as her hands. Kenneth's uncle let out another heavy sigh, his face softening with concern as he sat down. He rubbed his chin, thinking carefully before speaking. He's with his parents now, but I won't lie to you. It won't be easy for you. They won't take kindly to this situation. Oya's heart sank, though deep down she already knew that was the truth. Still, hearing it out loud made the weight of her reality press down on her even harder. After a long pause, the old man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wad of crumpled bills. Here, he said, pressing the money into her hand. It's not much, but it'll help you get by. And please be careful, Oya. The world isn't kind to girls in your position. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked down at the money, the weight of everything suddenly feeling too heavy to bear. Thank you, Uncle, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. She had no choice but to face whatever lay ahead, alone but determined to survive. Oya's journey to Kenneth's parents' home was long and arduous. The road stretched endlessly before her, and with each step, the weight of her situation pressed down harder. When she finally arrived, it was early morning. The air was thick with anticipation as she knocked on the door. Kenneth's mother answered, a tall, cold woman whose eyes narrowed the moment she saw Oya. What do you want? She asked, her voice sharp as a blade. Oya swallowed hard. I'm carrying Kenneth's child. I came to find him. For a moment, there was only silence. Then Kenneth's mother's face twisted in fury. You came here to trap my son, didn't you? He's a soldier now, serving this country, and you think you can tie him down with your lies? Her voice grew louder, more venomous. Leave this house at once or I'll have you thrown out. As Oya stood, paralyzed by shock, a man's voice cut through the tension. What's going on here? Kenneth's father appeared, a kinder, more measured man. His eyes softened when he saw Oya, recognizing the desperation in her gaze. She claims she's carrying Kenneth's child, his wife snapped, her words dripping with disdain. Kenneth's father sighed, deeply conflicted. You may stay here until Kenneth returns, but if you're lying, there will be consequences. Grateful but uncertain, Oya accepted. Yet life in Kenneth's household was far from easy. His mother's disdain never waned. Every day, Oya endured her sharp words and cold stares, the weight of being an unwanted presence pressing down on her. But she held on to hope, the hope that when Kenneth returned, he would make things right. Months passed, and Oya's belly swelled, announcing the undeniable truth of her condition. One evening, as she swept the front yard, she saw him, Kenneth, standing at the gate. Her heart leaped in her chest, and she ran to him, but his reaction shattered her hopes. He pushed her away, confusion and anger etched into his face. What are you doing here? He demanded, his voice cold. Before Oya could respond, his mother interjected, her voice laced with contempt. She claims you got her pregnant. For months, we've had to deal with her. Kenneth stared at Oya, his disbelief evident. I barely saw you. How could this happen? Tears welled in Oya's eyes. Kenneth, you promised. But before she could finish, Kenneth's father stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. It doesn't matter now. This is your child, Kenneth. You must take responsibility. Reluctantly, Kenneth agreed, but his voice was devoid of warmth. Fine, but I'm not ready to settle down. With that, he left again, leaving Oya behind with only a small sum of money and an empty promise. Alone, heartbroken, and facing a life of constant scorn, Oya struggled to survive. The day she gave birth was both a blessing and a curse. Twin boys, strong and healthy, but born into a world of hardship. Oya's life became a relentless cycle of survival, and Kenneth's family, especially his younger brother Kelechi, made it clear she was still not welcome. The cruelty culminated when Kelechi, in a fit of anger, struck her, sending Oya into unconsciousness. When she awoke in the hospital, her boys were safe, but her spirit was shattered. She knew then that it was time to leave. Oya's journey back to her village felt like an eternity. The dry, cracked roads stretched endlessly before her, each step heavier than the last. With her twins strapped to her body, one on her chest, the other on her back, their small cries were the only sounds breaking the heavy silence. Every breath she took felt like a fight against the weight of her exhaustion. But her mind wasn't on her fatigue. It was trapped in the swirling memories of the life she had left behind. Kenneth's broken promises haunted her. His mother's sharp words cut deep, and the realization that she had been abandoned burned in her heart. The sun sank low as Oya finally reached her village. The familiar sight of small huts and flickering oil lamps greeted her. But instead of comfort, a bittersweet ache settled in her chest. The sound of crickets filled the air, echoing the rhythm of her slow, labored steps. This was the place she had once called home. But now, it felt like a distant memory, a reminder of the simplicity she had lost. As Oya neared her family's compound, her feet faltered. Fear knotted in her stomach. What if they turned her away again? What if her father's fury still blazed, as fierce as it had been when he cast her out? She stood at the entrance, frozen, wrestling with her fears and doubts, her heart pounding in her chest. Hours seemed to pass before she finally gathered the strength to knock. The door creaked open, revealing Ifeoma, her younger sister. Shock widened her eyes, and for a moment, neither of them moved. "Oya, is it really you?" Ifeoma's voice was barely above a whisper, as if saying it louder might make the moment vanish. Tears filled Oya's eyes as she nodded. "Ifeoma, I'm home. Please, let me in." Without hesitation, Ifeoma pulled her sister into her arms, wrapping her in an embrace that broke the dam of emotions Oya had held back for so long. Sobs racked her body as she collapsed into her sister's arms, the weight of months of suffering, loneliness, and despair crashing down on her all at once. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Oya let herself cry. Truly, freely cry. But their reunion was short-lived. The stern voice of Chief Obiora echoed through the small room. "What is going on here?" Oya stiffened at the sound of her father's voice. Slowly, she turned to face him, her heart racing. His expression was unreadable as his gaze fell on her and the twins. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, something in his eyes softened, a flicker of sorrow, perhaps regret, briefly crossing his face. "Father, please, forgive me." Oya's voice trembled. "I had nowhere else to go. I've suffered so much. I just want to come home." Chief Obiora's face remained stern, his silence heavy. After what felt like an eternity, he sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping under the weight of unspoken emotions. "You've brought shame to this family," he said, his voice low, his eyes hard. "But you are still my daughter, and these are my grandchildren." Tears flowed freely down Oya's face, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Father. I promise I will work hard. I will do whatever it takes." Oya threw herself into village life, working harder than she ever had before. Each day was a battle. Long hours under the scorching sun, her hands roughened by field work, fetching water, and endless chores. She took on any job she could find, her once delicate fingers now calloused and cracked. But she didn't care. Every task was a step towards redemption, a way to prove to herself and her family that she was stronger than the pain she had endured. But despite her efforts, the whispers followed her. The villagers, their tongues sharp with gossip, pointed at her, murmuring about her fall from grace. The names they called her stung, but Oya held her head high, refusing to let their words break her spirit. Her focus was on her children, their future, their happiness. She couldn't change the past, but she could control how she faced the challenges ahead. One day, while working in the fields, Oya noticed a figure approaching from the distance. As they drew closer, recognition dawned. It was Auntie Chidinma, the neighbor who had once given her the money that had helped her survive her darkest days. The older woman's face softened with compassion as she reached Oya, her hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Oya, my dear," Auntie Chidinma began, her voice warm and soothing. "I've heard about all the hard work you've been doing. You've shown such strength, but you don't have to do this alone." Oya blinked, taken aback. "What do you mean?" "There's a women's cooperative in the nearby town," Auntie Chidinma explained. "They teach tailoring, baking, and other skills. Many women like you have turned their lives around through this program. I can introduce you to the organizer if you'd like." A glimmer of hope sparked in Oya's chest. "A trade? You think they would accept me?" Auntie Chidinma smiled warmly. "Of course. You've proven that you're strong. This could be the opportunity you need to build a better life for yourself and your children." Oya's heart swelled with gratitude. This was her chance, a way out of the hardships that had defined her life for so long. "Thank you, Auntie. I would be so grateful." The following week, with her twins strapped securely to her back, Oya traveled with Auntie Chidinma to the town. The women at the cooperative welcomed her with open arms, and Oya quickly enrolled in the tailoring program. Though the work was difficult, Oya found solace in the rhythm of the sewing machine, the vibrant colors of fabric, and the community of women who supported her. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she belonged, like she was building something meaningful. Months passed, and Oya became a skilled tailor. She started taking on small jobs, mending clothes for villagers, and creating dresses for special occasions. Her meticulous work gained attention, and soon, word spread about the young mother, with a gift for fashioning beautiful garments. Customers came from far and wide, eager to have their clothes made by her skilled hands. With the money she earned, Oya was able to provide a comfortable life for her children. They grew stronger each day, their bond with their mother deep and unbreakable. Despite the hardships they had faced, Oya felt a sense of pride in all she had achieved. She had rebuilt her life from the ashes of her past, and for the first time in years, she felt hope. But just as life seemed to be settling into a peaceful rhythm, a letter arrived. The sender, Kenneth. Oya spent the next few days in deep contemplation. Kenneth's letter lay on her small wooden table, its presence both a reminder of the past and a question mark over the future. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, knowing that whatever she chose would not only affect her, but also her children. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Ifeoma joined Oya on the front porch. The twins were asleep inside, their soft breaths a soothing rhythm in the background. "You've been quiet lately," Ifeoma said gently, sitting beside her sister. "Is everything all right?" Oya sighed, her fingers tracing the outline of the letter. "Kenneth wrote to me. He says he wants to be part of the children's lives. I don't know what to do, Ifeoma. I've built something here, a life for me and the twins, and I'm scared that letting him back in will destroy everything." Ifeoma listened quietly, her expression thoughtful. "Oya, you've been through so much, and you've come out stronger for it. But I think it's important to consider what's best for the children. They deserve to know their father, but only if he's truly changed and willing to support you, not bring more pain." Oya nodded, appreciating her sister's wisdom. "I just don't know if I can trust him again. What if he hasn't really changed? That's a risk you'll have to weigh carefully, Ifeoma replied. But whatever you decide, know that you're not alone. We're here for you. As the days turned into weeks, Oya wrestled with her decision. The women at the cooperative noticed her distraction and gently offered their support, sharing their own stories of love and loss. Each story added another layer to Oya's understanding of her situation, but still the answer eluded her. One afternoon, while Oya was working on a wedding dress for a client, Auntie Chidinma visited the cooperative. She could see the worry etched on Oya's face and pulled her aside. You've been carrying a heavy burden, my dear, Auntie Chidinma said kindly. What's troubling you? Oya explained everything, the letter, her fears, and her doubts. Auntie Chidinma listened intently, her brow furrowing in concern. Oya, sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that shape our lives the most, Auntie Chidinma said after a long pause. Kenneth has made his mistakes, but people can change. The question is whether he has truly changed and whether you're willing to give him the chance to prove it. Oya bit her lip, thinking about all the pain Kenneth had caused her. But what if he hasn't changed? What if he just hurts us again? That's a possibility, Auntie Chidinma acknowledged. But it's also possible that he's learned from his mistakes and wants to make things right. You don't have to decide today, but you should consider giving him the chance to show you who he is now. Not for his sake, but for the children, and for your own peace of mind. That night, after putting the twins to bed, Oya sat down at her small desk and picked up a pen. She stared at the blank sheet of paper before her, her mind swirling with thoughts and emotions. Finally, she began to write a letter to Kenneth, her words careful and measured. She wrote about the pain he had caused, the struggles she had faced, and the life she had built in his absence. She explained that she was willing to meet him, but only if he was sincere in his intentions. She also made it clear that her children's well-being was her top priority and that she would not tolerate any behavior that might harm them. When she finished, Oya folded the letter and placed it in an envelope, sealing it with a deep breath. She would send it tomorrow and wait for Kenneth's response. It was a step toward closure, no matter the outcome. A week later, Kenneth's reply arrived. His words were filled with remorse and a promise to make amends. He wanted to see her and the children, to start over if she would allow it. His letter was humble, acknowledging the hurt he had caused and expressing a deep desire to do better. Oya's heart ached with the weight of her decision. She knew she needed to see him, to look into his eyes and gauge the sincerity of his words. So she agreed to meet him at a neutral place, a small cafe in the town where she had learned her trade. On the day of the meeting, Oya dressed simply, her heart pounding with nervous anticipation. She left the twins with Ifeoma, who wished her luck as she headed out the door. When she arrived at the cafe, Kenneth was already there, sitting at a table by the window. He looked older, the weight of his experiences evident in the lines on his face. As Oya approached, he stood up, a mixture of hope and anxiety in his eyes. Oya, he said softly, as she sat down across from him. Kenneth, she replied, her voice steady but guarded. For a moment, they sat in silence, the tension between them palpable. Then Kenneth spoke, his voice filled with sincerity. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. I was young and foolish, and I didn't realize what I had until it was gone. I'm sorry, Oya, for everything. I want to be part of our children's lives, and I want to support you in any way I can. Oya studied his face, searching for any sign of deceit. But all she saw was a man who had been humbled by life, a man who genuinely wanted to make things right. I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you, Oya said honestly, but for the sake of our children, I'm willing to give you a chance. But know this, I won't tolerate any more lies or hurtful behavior. If you truly want to be part of their lives, you'll need to prove it." Kenneth nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. "I will, Oya. I promise." They talked for a while longer, discussing the logistics of how Kenneth would be involved in the children's lives. Oya made it clear that her priority was their well-being, and Kenneth agreed to her terms without hesitation. As they parted ways, Oya felt a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. She had taken a step toward healing, but the road ahead was still uncertain. Only time would tell if Kenneth could truly keep his promises. But for now, Oya knew she had made the right decision, for herself and for her children. Months passed, and Kenneth began to slowly integrate himself into the lives of his children. He visited regularly, bringing small gifts and spending time with them under Oya's watchful eye. To her surprise, he kept his promises, showing up consistently and trying to bond with the twins. The villagers, who had once gossiped about Oya's fall from grace, now watched with curiosity as Kenneth reappeared in her life. Some were skeptical, while others saw it as a sign of redemption. But Oya didn't care about their opinions. Her focus was on her children and the life she was building for them. With the help of the women's cooperative, Oya's tailoring business flourished. She became known for her skill and creativity, and soon she was able to open her own small shop in the town. The shop was modest, but it was hers, a symbol of her hard work and determination. Each dress, each stitch, was a testament to the resilience that had carried her through the darkest times. Kenneth, true to his word, supported her in her endeavors. He provided financial assistance when needed, and even helped with the children when he could. Although their relationship was no longer romantic, they found a way to co-parent respectfully, with the shared goal of raising their children in a loving environment. One day, as Oya was closing up her shop, she received an unexpected visitor, Auntie Said, the military woman who had once come to her aid in her darkest hour. Oya's eyes filled with tears as she embraced the woman who had shown her kindness when she needed it most. "Auntie Said, I can't believe you're here," Oya exclaimed, overwhelmed with emotion. "I heard about your success, my dear," Auntie Said replied, smiling warmly. "I'm so proud of you, Oya. You've come such a long way." Oya beamed with pride. "I couldn't have done it without people like you who believed in me. Thank you for everything." Auntie Said nodded, her eyes shining with pride. "You've always had the strength within you, Oya. You just needed a little push. I'm glad to see you standing tall." As they sat together, reminiscing about the past, Oya realized how far she had come. She was no longer the frightened, desperate girl who had been cast out of her home. She was a mother, a businesswoman, and a survivor who had rebuilt her life from the ground up. As the sun set on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the town, Oya felt a deep sense of peace. The road to redemption had been long and difficult, but she had walked it with courage and grace. And though there were still challenges ahead, she knew she was ready to face them, because she had learned that no matter how dark the night, there was always a new dawn waiting on the other side. As Oya's tailoring business flourished, she became a prominent figure in the town. Her resilience and determination had earned her respect, and many young women began looking up to her as a role model. Despite her success, Oya remained humble, never forgetting the trials that had shaped her. However, as her business grew, so did her responsibilities. Balancing work, motherhood, and her complex relationship with Kenneth required all her strength. Though Kenneth had proven to be a reliable father, Oya still found it difficult to fully trust him. There were moments when she questioned his sincerity, wondering if he was truly committed to the new life they were building for their children. One evening, after a particularly busy day at the shop, Oya returned home to find Kenneth waiting for her. The twins were playing in the yard, their laughter echoing through the air. Kenneth stood near the door, a serious expression on his face. "We need to talk," he said, his tone unusually grave. Oya's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Kenneth hesitated, glancing at the children before speaking. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you. It's about my past, before we met." Oya's stomach churned with anxiety. "Go on," she urged, bracing herself for whatever he was about to reveal. Kenneth took a deep breath. "Before I met you, I was involved in some things I'm not proud of. I was young, reckless, and I made a lot of mistakes. One of those mistakes has come back to haunt me." "What do you mean?" Oya asked, her heart pounding. "There was a time when I got mixed up with some bad people," Kenneth admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "I owe them a debt, and they've recently found me. They're demanding that I pay them back, and if I don't, they've threatened to come after my family." Oya felt a wave of fear wash over her. "How much do you owe them?" "It's a lot," Kenneth replied, avoiding her gaze. "More than I can pay right now. I've been trying to figure out a way to handle it without getting you and the kids involved. But I'm running out of time." Oya's mind raced. This revelation was like a dark cloud overshadowing the stability she had fought so hard to create. She had been on the brink of trusting Kenneth again, but now this new threat loomed over them like a storm. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice trembling. Kenneth shook his head, his expression bleak. "I don't know, but I promise you, I will find a way to keep you and the kids safe. I won't let anything happen to you." Despite his reassurances, Oya couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled in her chest. She had faced many challenges before, but this one felt different, more dangerous. The shadows of Kenneth's past had returned, threatening to undo everything she had worked so hard to build. As the days passed, Kenneth became increasingly preoccupied, spending long hours away from home as he tried to resolve the situation. Oya, meanwhile, kept a close watch on her children, never letting them out of her sight. She knew she couldn't afford to let her guard down, not with the danger lurking so close. One night, after putting the twins to bed, Oya sat alone in the living room, her thoughts racing. She knew she couldn't rely solely on Kenneth to protect them. She needed to take matters into her own hands. Determined to find a solution, Oya decided to visit Auntie Chidinma the next morning. If anyone could offer advice, it was her. When she arrived at Auntie Chidinma's house, she found the older woman in her garden, tending to her flowers. Auntie Chidinma greeted her with a warm smile, but her expression quickly turned serious when she saw the worry etched on Oya's face. "What's troubling you, Oya?" Auntie Chidinma asked, guiding her to a seat on the porch. Oya explained everything: Kenneth's debt, the threats, and her fears for the safety of her children. As she spoke, Auntie Chidinma listened intently, her brow furrowing with concern. "Oya, this is a dangerous situation," Auntie Chidinma said after a long pause. "You're right to be worried, but you're also strong, and you've overcome so much already. We need to think carefully about the next steps." "What can I do?" Oya asked, desperation creeping into her voice. "There are a few things you can do," Auntie Chidinma replied. "First, you need to gather as much information as possible about these people Kenneth owes. The more you know, the better prepared you'll be. Second, you need to start saving money, even if it's just a little at a time. And finally, you need to consider reaching out to the authorities. They might be able to help." Oya nodded, absorbing Auntie Chidinma's advice. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect my children." Auntie Chidinma placed a reassuring hand on Oya's shoulder. "I know you will, my dear. And remember, You're not alone. I'm here for you. And so are the women at the cooperative. We'll find a way to get through this together. Buoyed by Auntie Chidinma's support, Oya set to work. She began to quietly gather information about Kenneth's past associates, reaching out to old acquaintances and listening for any rumors that might provide a clue. She also started setting aside a portion of her earnings, even though it meant tightening her already strained budget. But as she delved deeper into the situation, Oya discovered that the people Kenneth owed were far more dangerous than she had imagined. They were involved in illegal activities and had a reputation for violence. The more she learned, the more she realized just how precarious their situation was. One evening, while Oya was closing her shop, a man appeared in the doorway. He was tall, with a scar running down one side of his face, and his presence sent a chill down her spine. "Good evening, madam," the man said, his voice smooth but menacing. "I believe you're Kenneth's wife." Oya's heart raced, but she kept her expression calm. "I'm his partner. Who are you?" The man smiled coldly. "Let's just say I'm someone who's very interested in making sure Kenneth pays his debts. And if he doesn't, well, we'll have to find other ways to collect what's owed." Oya's blood ran cold. "What do you want?" "I want Kenneth to pay up, and I want you to remind him of that," the man replied, his eyes narrowing. "You see, we don't care how he gets the money, as long as we get what's ours. If he can't pay, then we'll have to take it out of something, or someone, he cares about." Oya felt a surge of fear and anger. She couldn't let these people hurt her family. Summoning all her courage, she met the man's gaze head-on. "Tell your boss that we'll pay, but if you come near my children, you'll regret it." The man chuckled darkly. "I like your spirit, but let's hope it doesn't get you into more trouble than you can handle." With that, he turned and left, leaving Oya shaken but determined. She knew she had to act quickly. The time for gathering information was over. Now she needed a plan to protect her family. That night, she and Kenneth sat down to discuss their options. They considered going to the police, but Kenneth was afraid that involving the authorities would only make things worse. They also thought about fleeing the town, but Oya couldn't bear the thought of uprooting her children and leaving behind the life she had worked so hard to build. In the end, they decided on a different approach. They would confront the debtors head-on, offering them what little money they had saved as a down payment and negotiating for more time to pay off the rest. It was a risky move, but they had no other choice. The next day, Kenneth arranged a meeting with the debtors at a secluded spot outside of town. Oya insisted on coming with him, despite his protests. She knew that her presence might make a difference, showing that they were serious about resolving the situation. When they arrived at the meeting place, the atmosphere was tense. The same man with the scar was there, along with a few other men who looked just as dangerous. Kenneth and Oya approached cautiously, carrying the money they had scraped together. "So you've decided to come to your senses," the man with the scar sneered. "Let's see what you've got." Kenneth handed over the money, and the man counted it quickly. He looked up, unimpressed. "This is only a fraction of what you owe. You expect us to accept this?" "It's all we have right now," Kenneth said, his voice steady. "But we're willing to work out a payment plan. We just need more time." The man with the scar eyed them both, his expression unreadable. "And why should we trust you? You've already failed to pay what you owe." Oya stepped forward, her voice firm. "Because we have children to protect. We don't want any trouble. We just want to settle this debt and move on. We're asking for your understanding." The man studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. We'll give you 1 month to come up with the rest. But if you fail, you won't like the consequences. Understand?" Kenneth and Oya nodded in agreement, their hearts heavy with the weight of the deal they had just made. As they left the meeting, Oya couldn't shake the feeling that they had only bought themselves a temporary reprieve. The threat was still very real, and they would need to be vigilant. But despite the danger, Oya was determined to see this through. She had survived too much to let fear break her now. With Kenneth by her side and the support of her community, she knew they could find a way out of this darkness. The coming weeks would test them in ways they had never imagined, but Oya was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She had learned that strength wasn't just about surviving. It was about fighting for the future you wanted, no matter the odds. And so, the battle for her family's safety began, with Oya leading the charge. As the weeks passed, Oya and Kenneth struggled to gather the money needed to pay off the debt. Kenneth had taken on extra work, doing whatever he could to raise the funds, but the tension in their lives grew palpable. Every shadow felt like a threat, and Oya couldn't shake the sense that something far worse was lurking just beyond the horizon. One evening, while Oya was closing her shop, she noticed a stranger loitering nearby. At first, she thought it was one of the debt collectors keeping an eye on her, but something about the way the man lingered in the shadows sent a chill down her spine. He wasn't just watching, he was studying her. Oya hurried home, but the unsettling encounter stayed with her. A few days later, another letter arrived at her home. Unlike the previous threats from the debtors, this one was anonymous, written in neat, careful handwriting. It read, "You think you've solved your problems, but you're only beginning to understand the danger you're in. Your family is in more trouble than you realize, and someone close to you isn't who they claim to be." The letter sent Oya's mind reeling. Was this another threat from the debtors, or was there something more sinister at play? And what did it mean that someone close to her wasn't who they claimed to be? Could Kenneth be hiding something else? That night, she confronted Kenneth, showing him the letter. His eyes widened as he read the note, and he shook his head vehemently. "Oya, I swear to you, I have no idea who sent this or what they're talking about. You need to believe me." Oya wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at the edges of her mind. The weight of the secrets Kenneth had already kept from her made it hard to fully trust him. But for the sake of their children, she chose to push the doubt aside, for now. A few days later, Oya received a surprise visit at her shop. A tall, elegant woman, dressed in expensive clothes and wearing dark sunglasses, entered the store. She had an air of confidence that made everyone around her take notice. Oya had never seen this woman before, but there was something familiar about her. "Good afternoon," the woman said, her voice smooth and authoritative. "Are you Oya?" "I am," Oya replied, cautious but politely. "How can I help you?" The woman removed her sunglasses, revealing striking features and piercing eyes. "My name is Vera. I'm Kenneth's old friend." Oya's heart skipped a beat. She had never heard Kenneth mention anyone named Vera. She motioned for the woman to sit, and as they settled into their chairs, Oya felt an uneasy tension building between them. "I've come to offer you a piece of advice," Vera said, crossing her legs and leaning forward slightly. "Leave Kenneth." "What?" Oya blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "You heard me," Vera continued, her tone cool and commanding. "Kenneth isn't who you think he is. There are things about him that you don't know. Things that could destroy you and your family. For your own safety, you should cut ties with him." Oya's pulse quickened, but she kept her composure. "And why should I trust anything you say? I don't even know you." Vera smiled faintly, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's fair. But I think you'll find that what I'm saying is true. Kenneth owes me something far more valuable than money. and I'm not leaving until I get it." "What do you want from him?" Oya asked, her voice filled with both suspicion and anger. "I want what's rightfully mine," Vera replied cryptically. "But that's between Kenneth and me. I'm here as a courtesy to warn you. Stay out of it. Things will get very dangerous very soon." With that, Vera stood up and left the shop, leaving Oya stunned and filled with questions. Who was this woman, and what was her connection to Kenneth? And why was she issuing veiled threats? That night, Oya waited until the twins were asleep before confronting Kenneth again. She described Vera's visit in detail, watching for any sign of recognition or guilt on his face. As soon as she mentioned Vera's name, Kenneth's expression darkened, and he sat down heavily in a chair. "Oya," he began, his voice heavy with regret. "There's something I need to tell you. Vera isn't just an old friend. She's someone I used to work for, in a way. Back when I was trying to pay off my debts, I got involved with people who operated outside the law. Vera was one of them. I did things I'm not proud of." Oya's breath caught in her throat. "What kind of things, Kenneth?" "I worked for her as a courier. At first, it was just transporting goods, but later I realized I was delivering more than just packages. She was involved in smuggling, and I was one of her runners," Kenneth confessed, his voice trembling with shame. "I didn't know how deep I was in until it was too late. I managed to get out, but now it seems she's found me again." Oya's mind spun with the weight of this new information. Kenneth had not only been in debt to dangerous people, but had been involved in criminal activity. Worse, Vera seemed intent on dragging them back into that world. "What does she want from you now?" Oya asked, her voice tight with fear. "She wants the money she claims I still owe her," Kenneth said, running a hand through his hair. "But more than that, she wants to pull me back into her operations. And if I refuse, she'll come after me and anyone close to me." Oya's heart sank. Vera's threats weren't just empty words. They were real, and they were dangerous. For the first time, she felt the full weight of the danger pressing down on them. They weren't just fighting off debt collectors. They were facing a criminal network. "We need to get out of this town," Oya said, her voice trembling. "We need to disappear." Kenneth shook his head. "It's not that simple. Vera has connections everywhere. If we run, she'll find us. The only way out is to face her head on." Oya's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. She had survived so much already, but this was different. This was a fight for their lives. The next morning, Oya awoke to find an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a photograph of her and her twins, taken from a distance. There was no note, but the message was clear. They were being watched. Panic surged through her, but she quickly composed herself. She knew she had to think fast and be smart about the next steps. That afternoon, as she was leaving her shop, she encountered a man she hadn't seen in years. Emeka, an old friend from her village, who had left to join the police force. Emeka had always been close to Oya's family, and they had once been inseparable as children. "Oya?" Emeka called out, surprise in his voice. "It's been ages. How are you?" Oya was taken aback but felt a surge of relief seeing a familiar face. They exchanged pleasantries, but it wasn't long before Oya confided in him about her situation. As soon as she mentioned Vera and Kenneth's entanglement, Emeka's expression became serious. "Vera? I've heard of her. She's been under investigation for a while. The authorities have been trying to bring her down, but no one has ever come forward with enough evidence." "Are you saying you can help?" Oya asked, a spark of hope igniting in her chest. Emeka nodded. "If you're willing to cooperate, I can make sure you and your family are protected, but it won't be easy. Vera is dangerous, and going up against her will require careful planning. But if we can get enough evidence, we can bring her down for good." Oya hesitated. She had never considered involving the police, knowing that it could escalate the situation, but with Emeka's help, there might be a way out of this nightmare. She agreed to cooperate, and together, they began devising a plan to gather information on Vera and her operations. However, as they worked on their plan, Oya couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching their every move. And as she delved deeper into the underworld that Kenneth had once been part of, she realized that they were up against something far bigger and far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Just when Oya thought things couldn't get more complicated, an unexpected twist shattered her world once again. Late one night, after returning from a secret meeting with Emeka, Oya found Kenneth standing in their living room, his face pale and his hands shaking. "What's going on?" Oya asked, her heart racing with dread. Kenneth didn't answer right away. He looked at her, guilt and fear warring on his face. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I made a deal with Vera," he confessed. "She promised that if I gave her the information she needed about your work with the police, she would leave us alone. I'm sorry, Oya. I had no choice." Oya felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under her. Betrayal hit her like a punch to the gut, and she staggered back, disbelief and fury flooding her veins. You told her about Emeka? About our plan?" Oya's voice shook with rage. Kenneth nodded, his face twisted with regret. "I didn't want to, but she threatened to hurt the kids. I thought I was protecting them, but I realize now, I've made everything worse." Oya's entire body trembled with anger and heartbreak. She had trusted Kenneth, despite everything, and he had betrayed her in the worst way possible. Now, Vera knew everything, and they were in more danger than ever before. Before she could respond, a loud knock echoed through the house. Oya's blood ran cold. She knew who it was before she even opened the door. Vera had come for them. The knock on the door reverberated through the room like a death sentence. Oya's heart pounded in her chest as she locked eyes with Kenneth, fury and betrayal burning within her. How could he have done this? How could he have sold them out to Vera? "Oya, I'm sorry," Kenneth began, but Oya cut him off. "Save it, Kenneth. You've put all of us in danger. Do you even understand what you've done?" she hissed, her voice low but sharp. The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. The sound of it sent chills through Oya's spine. Without another word, she moved swiftly, grabbing the twins who were asleep in the next room and heading toward the back door. Kenneth rushed after her, but Oya spun around, blocking his path. "You stay here," she snapped. "If Vera's here because of your betrayal, you deal with her." Kenneth's face crumpled with guilt and fear. He opened his mouth to argue, but the cold, unyielding expression on Oya's face stopped him. She wasn't going to let him endanger the children any further. Oya slipped out the back, her heart racing as she carried her sleeping twins in her arms. She crept through the shadows of the night, her breath shallow and her mind racing with panic. Where could she go? How could she escape this trap? As she rounded the corner of the house, she heard the front door creak open. Voices drifted through the air. Vera's low, menacing tone and Kenneth's desperate attempts to placate her. But Oya couldn't focus on their words. All she could think about was getting her children to safety. She sprinted toward Auntie Chidinma's house, hoping to hide there until she could come up with a plan. Her mind swirled with fear, anger, and heartbreak. Kenneth's betrayal had shattered any trust she had rebuilt, and now they were all caught in the crosshairs of Vera's wrath. Inside the house, Kenneth faced Vera alone. She stood in the doorway, her sleek figure casting a long shadow across the room. Her cold, calculating eyes swept over the interior before landing on Kenneth. "I see you've made the right choice," Vera said, her voice like ice. "But you're a fool if you think I'm here to negotiate." Kenneth swallowed hard, trying to maintain his composure. "I did what you asked. I gave you the information. Now you promised you'd leave us alone. Vera's lips curled into a mocking smile. Promised? Oh, Kenneth, you must be more naive than I thought. I never promised to leave anyone alone. I simply said I'd consider it. But now your betrayal has given me even more leverage. Kenneth's heart sank. He had gambled on the hope that Vera's threat would end if he cooperated. He hadn't anticipated that Vera was always one step ahead, using his desperation to tighten her grip on their lives. Where is she? Vera asked, her tone suddenly turning lethal. Where's Oya? Kenneth stiffened, torn between fear for his own safety and the growing realization that his betrayal had only made things worse. She's gone. Took the kids and left. Vera's expression darkened. She stepped forward, her presence suffocating. You know what happens to people who try to outsmart me, Kenneth. You're already deep enough. Do you really want to dig the hole deeper? Kenneth backed away, the walls closing in around him. He had no idea how to fix what he'd done. His attempts to save his family had only endangered them further, and now the reckoning had arrived. He had run out of time and options. Meanwhile, Oya arrived at Auntie Chidinma's house, pounding on the door in desperation. The older woman opened it quickly, her face filled with concern as she saw the fear in Oya's eyes. What's happening, Oya? Auntie Chidinma asked, ushering her inside. Vera, she's here, Oya gasped, placing her twins down gently on a couch. Kenneth, he betrayed us. He gave her everything. Auntie Chidinma's eyes widened with shock, but she quickly regained her composure. We'll hide you here for now, but if Vera's after you, she won't stop until she gets what she wants. As Oya sat down to catch her breath, she heard movement outside. At first, she thought it was the wind, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. The sense of being watched intensified, and she realized with horror that Vera's men must have followed her. Without warning, the front door was kicked open, and two of Vera's thugs stormed into the house. Auntie Chidinma let out a startled scream as Oya instinctively grabbed the twins, her mind racing with panic. There's nowhere to run, Oya, one of the men snarled, stepping forward. Come quietly, and we won't hurt you or the kids. Oya's body tensed, her maternal instincts roaring to life. She wasn't going to let them take her or harm her children. As the men advanced, Auntie Chidinma, quick-thinking and fearless, grabbed a heavy iron rod from near the fireplace. With surprising speed, she swung it at one of the men, catching him off guard. The man stumbled backward, cursing as he clutched his arm. Run, Oya! Take the back door! Auntie Chidinma shouted, standing her ground as the second man lunged toward her. Oya didn't need to be told twice. She bolted toward the back door, clutching her children tightly as she fled into the night. Behind her, she heard the sounds of a struggle. Auntie Chidinma fighting valiantly to buy her time. But as she raced through the darkness, Oya knew they couldn't run forever. Vera's reach was long, and it wouldn't be long before more of her men would come looking for them. Just when all seemed lost, a figure emerged from the shadows as Oya ran down the narrow alley behind Auntie Chidinma's house. Her heart leapt into her throat, thinking it was one of Vera's men. But as the figure stepped into the light, Oya's panic eased. It was Emeka. Oya, I got here as fast as I could, Emeka said, out of breath but alert. We've been tracking Vera's movements, and it looks like things are escalating faster than we thought. Emeka, she sent her men to the house. They're after the kids, Oya cried, her voice frantic. We're not safe here. We need to move now, Emeka said firmly, his eyes scanning the surroundings. I've arranged for a safe house, but we have to leave immediately. Oya nodded, clutching her children as she followed Emeka through the darkened streets. Every sound, every shadow felt like a threat as they moved swiftly through the town, avoiding the main roads and keeping to the alleyways. As they approached the edge of town, Emeka led them to an old warehouse. It looked abandoned from the outside, but when he opened the door, Oya saw that it had been converted into a temporary safe house. Inside, a few of Emeka's colleagues from the police force were waiting, along with Auntie Said, the military woman who had once come to Oya's aid. Auntie Said's eyes met Oya's with a fierce, protective intensity. "I told you before, no one messes with my people and gets away with it," she said, her voice calm but deadly. "Vera's not going to know what hit her." As the group gathered in the warehouse, Emeka laid out the plan. They would use the safe house as a base to lure Vera into a trap. With Auntie Said's military connections and Emeka's knowledge of Vera's operations, they could outsmart her, but it would require careful coordination and bait. "We need to draw her out," Emeka explained. "She's after you and Kenneth. If we make her believe she's won, she'll come out of hiding." Oya's heart raced. "You want to use me as bait?" "It's risky," Auntie Said said, her voice steady. "But it's the only way to take Vera down for good. We'll be with you every step of the way." Oya hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. But then she looked at her children, sleeping peacefully in the corner. She thought of Auntie Chidinma, who had risked everything to protect her. She thought of the future she had fought so hard to build. If she didn't face Vera now, they would never be free. "I'll do it," Oya said, her voice filled with determination. "Let's end this." As the trap was set, Oya prepared herself for the confrontation that could change everything. She knew the risks, but she also knew that she couldn't live in fear any longer. Vera had terrorized her family for too long, and now, with the support of her allies, Oya was ready to fight back. But as the clock ticked down to the final showdown, Oya couldn't shake the feeling that there was still one more secret waiting to be uncovered. One final twist that could tip the scales in ways she never expected. As the preparations for the trap continued, Oya couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. Vera's obsession with Kenneth seemed personal, but there was a darkness lurking beneath the surface that she hadn't yet uncovered. She couldn't stop thinking about Vera's cryptic words, "Kenneth owes me something far more valuable than money." That night, while everyone else was resting in the safe house, Oya pulled Emeka aside. "There's something Vera isn't telling us," she said, her voice low. "I don't think this is just about the debt. It feels bigger than that." Emeka's brow furrowed. "You're right. I've been digging into Vera's background, and there's something off about the whole situation. Kenneth's involvement with her wasn't just about running errands for her smuggling operation. It goes deeper than that." "What do you mean?" Oya asked, her pulse quickening. Emeka hesitated before speaking. "I found records showing that Vera used to run a trafficking ring, human trafficking, and according to the information we've gathered, Kenneth might have unknowingly helped her in the past. He was delivering people, not just packages. That's why Vera is so determined to keep him under her control. He's a key piece of evidence that could expose her entire operation." Oya's heart dropped. She had thought Kenneth's involvement with Vera was criminal, but she had never imagined it was this horrific. The revelation hit her like a tidal wave. Kenneth had been involved in something far worse than she could have ever anticipated. "Does Kenneth know?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm not sure," Emeka replied. "It's possible he didn't fully understand what he was involved in at the time. But if Vera thinks he might turn against her and expose her, that would explain why she's willing to go to such lengths to keep him in her grasp." Oya sat in stunned silence, trying to process the weight of this new information. It wasn't just about protecting her family from Vera's violence. It was about bringing down a dangerous criminal network. And now, she was caught in the middle of it. "We can't just set a trap for her without understanding the full scope of what she's capable of," Oya said, her voice firm. "We need to dig deeper. There's something else she's hiding." The next morning, As the sun began to rise over the horizon, Oya confronted Kenneth. She pulled him aside, away from Emeka and Auntie Sad, and looked him directly in the eyes. "Tell me the truth, Kenneth," she demanded. "What were you really doing for Vera? What have you gotten us into?" Kenneth looked away, shame written all over his face. "I didn't know, Oya. I swear I didn't. At first it was just small jobs, moving packages, making deliveries. But then one day I realized the packages weren't what I thought they were. I saw people, women and children, being taken. But by then I was in too deep. I couldn't get out." Oya's blood ran cold. "And you never told me? You let me and our children live in this danger without warning? I thought I could protect you," Kenneth shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "I thought if I stayed away from Vera it would all go away. But it never did. She has too much power, too many people working for her. I tried to keep you out of it. I thought I could fix it on my own." Oya's heart pounded in her chest. She could see the fear and regret in Kenneth's eyes, but it didn't erase the anger boiling inside her. He had put their lives at risk by keeping these secrets, and now they were in more danger than ever. "You should have told me," she said, her voice shaking with a mix of fury and hurt. "We could have faced this together, but now Vera's coming for all of us." Kenneth dropped his head, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I know, and I'm sorry. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Before Oya could respond, Emeka rushed into the room, his face tense with urgency. "We need to move, now." "What's happened?" Oya asked, her body tensing for the inevitable. "Vera knows where we are," Emeka said, his voice clipped. "She's on her way here, and she's bringing backup." As the team moved quickly to set up their final plan, the air was thick with tension. Auntie Sade, with her military precision, took control of the operation, coordinating with Emeka and the other officers to create a perimeter around the safe house. "Vera's bringing her thugs, but we'll be ready for her," Auntie Sade said, her voice calm but commanding. "This ends tonight." Oya stood at the center of the room, her heart pounding as she prepared herself for the confrontation ahead. She glanced over at her children, who were being watched over by one of the officers. The thought of Vera getting anywhere near them sent a surge of adrenaline through her veins. As night fell, the quiet around the warehouse grew eerie. The trap was set, and all they could do now was wait. Kenneth stood beside Oya, his face pale but determined. He had made mistakes, but tonight he was ready to face the consequences of his actions. Suddenly, the sound of vehicles approaching broke the silence. Oya's heart raced as she saw the headlights of several cars pulling up outside the warehouse. Vera had arrived. The doors to the warehouse burst open, and Vera strode in, flanked by her henchmen. Her cold, calculating gaze swept over the room, landing on Kenneth first, then shifting to Oya. Well, Vera said, her voice dripping with venom. "Looks like we have quite the little reunion here. Did you really think you could hide from me?" Oya stepped forward, her eyes blazing with anger. "It's over, Vera. We know everything about your trafficking ring, about the people you've hurt. You won't get away with this." Vera's smile widened, cruel and dangerous. "And who's going to stop me? You? Kenneth? You're both in too deep. There's no crawling out of this hole." Emeka and his team moved into position, surrounding Vera and her men. But Vera didn't seem the least bit concerned. In fact, she looked amused. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Vera sneered. "But I'm always a step ahead." As she spoke, one of her men suddenly pulled out a small remote device from his jacket, pressing a button that sent a series of beeps echoing through the warehouse. Oya's blood ran cold. "What have you done?" she whispered, dread creeping up her spine. Vera's eyes gleamed with malice. "Insurance. Let's just say that if I don't walk out of here, neither do you." Oya's mind raced. She realized too late what Vera had done. She had rigged the warehouse with explosives. They were all trapped. Before anyone could react, a voice echoed through the warehouse. Auntie Said's voice. "Stop right there, Vera." Everyone turned to see Auntie Said, but something was different. The military woman who had once seemed like their strongest ally now stood with a cold, calculating expression on Vera's side. Oya's heart sank as realization hit her like a freight train. Auntie Said had been working with Vera all along. The military woman, who had saved Oya in the past, had been part of Vera's operation from the beginning. She had used Oya's trust to gather information and set them all up. "You," Oya breathed, her voice filled with disbelief and betrayal. Auntie Said smiled coldly. "I told you, Oya, no one messes with my people. Unfortunately, you're not one of them. Vera and I have been in this business together for years. I just needed you to lead me to Kenneth." Kenneth's face paled. "You were using us?" "Of course," Auntie Said replied smoothly. "And now that we've tied up all the loose ends, it's time to end this." Emeka and his officers stood frozen, caught between their disbelief and the deadly situation they now found themselves in. The room was thick with tension, and any wrong move could set off the explosives. Vera's smile widened. "It's over, Oya. You should have stayed out of it." But Oya wasn't ready to give up. With everything she had fought for, her children, her freedom, her future, she refused to let Vera and Auntie Said win. Her mind raced as she scanned the room, searching for a way out. And then, in the chaos of the moment, she saw it. A small window at the back of the warehouse, just large enough for her to slip through. If she could get her children out, maybe they stood a chance. Oya shot a glance at Emeka, who seemed to understand her silent message. He gave a barely perceptible nod, signaling that he would cover her. Without another second to waste, Oya moved. In one swift motion, she grabbed her twins and bolted toward the window, ignoring the shouts and chaos that erupted behind her. Emeka sprang into action, drawing his weapon and firing at the thug with the detonator, hoping to buy Oya enough time. Vera screamed in fury as Oya reached the window, pushing her children through first, before climbing out herself. The sound of gunfire and shouting filled the air as Emeka and the officers engaged in a firefight with Vera's men. But as Oya ran, carrying her children in her arms, she heard a deafening explosion behind her. The warehouse went up in flames, and the force of the blast sent her tumbling to the ground. She shielded her children as best she could, her ears ringing and her body aching. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, as the dust settled and the flames roared behind her, Oya slowly lifted her head. She was alive, and so were her children. But the cost of that victory was heavy, and she knew that this battle was far from over. Oya's world had been turned upside down once again, but she had survived. Now she had to confront the greatest betrayal of all and take down Vera and Auntie Said once and for all.